male with glasses may have shot someone. Last I heard is a balding male with glasses may have gone inside with a gun and there were shots fired.
That's the Sikh temple, correct?
That's affirmative, 7512 South Hall. 328 East Manitoba, I have a victim down in the front yard and they're still hearing shots.
5, I got someone walking out the driveway towards me. I have one officer shot. I got a man with a gun in the parking lot. Drop the gun! Man with the gun. In the parking lot. Went to subject down! Officers down!
On August 5th, 2012, terror came to Oak Creek, Wisconsin, a small town on the outskirts of Milwaukee. A white supremacist, Wade Michael Page, attacked a Gurdwara, a Sikh temple.
So the shooter that morning, he was driving a red pickup truck, drove in from that side, drove in, and he parked his truck with the nose out facing the exit. So almost in a tactical position to leave. And at that time, there was 2 people, and they saw the shooter first, and those were the first two that were shot. By that time, there was 2 children who were kind of playing outside, and this door was open to come in and out, and they run inside, and they start to alarm everybody. Had those children not pre-warned people, people would have had no idea that this just had happened. So as the shooter came inside, he shoots a round at the women who were coming out of the bar hall. And that round is still lodged in that door frame over here. One of the ladies who would be shot and killed went inside the main hall. And so the shooter actually followed her into the main hall, where she would kind of be a sitting duck. And eventually, he gets to the end of this hallway. Dad was in here with somebody else, and then that other person was shot 2 times. When he was shot 2 times, the shooter ran out of bullets in his magazine. And as he's reloading, the person that was shot twice in the stomach runs out and goes down the hall. At that time, Dad had kind of a butter knife and was trying to wrestle with the shooter. And as he's trying to wrestle with the shooter reloads and fires 5 rounds into my dad's side.
When the shooting started, Pardeep Singh Kalika was still on his way to the temple. His mother and father were already there.
We got into the car, we started to get onto the freeway, and my daughter, she forgot her notebook inside the house, and she told me, and then kind of making that decision of, do we go back or do we just keep going forward? And luckily, we decided to turn back around and go to the house. I think about really the what ifs in that moment of, what if we didn't forget that? What could have happened?
Pardeep's father, the president of the temple, Satwant Singh Kalika, was among those that died. 6 people were killed that day, 3 others were wounded. A 7th victim recently passed.
My real sort of grief shows up in quiet moments of solitude, of being on a freeway, driving to Green Bay, and all of a sudden you hear something, a song, or you smell a noise, or there's some kind of sense that kind of goes off, and you have to park your car on the side of the road because the feelings are too strong.
The mass shooting shocked a community, a nation.
You get to a place where you're like, okay, I need an explanation of what happened. I need an explanation of why it happened.
That path of questioning led Pardeep to Arno Michaelis, a former white supremacist.
I grew up in a pretty well-to-do suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, never went hungry, never took a beating. My parents were together, they both loved me very much. But my father's alcoholism made things really difficult for my mom, and she suffered throughout my childhood, and that kind of drove me to start lashing out at other kids. It became like an addiction to the point where what was thrilling the first time wasn't 10 times later, and I had to keep escalating my antisocial behavior. So I went from being a bully on the school bus to fights in the schoolyard to breaking and entering to vandalism, burglary. By the time I was 14, I started drinking myself, and by the time I'm 16, I'm a full-blown alcoholic. I had been violent since I was a little kid, and hate was just another part of the rush. And that's why I believe I was so attracted to the white nationalist ideology.
We must secure the existence of our race and the future for white children.
I was exposed to white nationalism through white power skinhead music. I had already been in the punk scene. I liked really fast, hard, aggressive music. And I heard a white power skinhead band from England singing about race and nation and blood and soil. And I didn't really have any affinity for those concepts other than that they were so repulsive to civil society. I lost count of how many fights I got into. There were more times than I can count or remember where I beat people and left them for dead. Like I had no idea whether they were dead or alive when I left. And a lot of it I was blacked out drunk for, which is absolutely no excuse, but I mention it just to say I can't even quantify the extent of the damage that I did and how many people that I hurt.
In time, Michaelis came to the realization that he needed to change.
Being a racist, living under a racial identity, and refusing to see anything else about my identity and anything else about other people is just an exhausting way for any human being to live. It sucks. Hate sucks. It sucks the life out of you. And that brought me to a point in 1994 where I'm looking for an excuse to leave. That excuse came in like a two-stage process. Early in that year, my girlfriend and I broke up, and I became a single parent to our 18-month-old daughter. And a couple months after that, after a concert my band had played, a second friend of mine was murdered in a street fight. And by that time, I had lost count how many friends had been incarcerated. So it finally hit me that if I didn't leave, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter.
Michaelis began working as a peace activist, going public with his white supremacist background in 2010. But his past would soon come back to haunt him. Some 2 years later, just a few miles from where Arno lived, came the attack on the Sikh temple.
Before it was even announced, I just had this feeling in my gut that it was a white nationalist behind this attack. The next day, when they announced the shooter's name, Wade Michael Page, I was able to establish that I didn't know him personally. But then it was revealed that he was part of this gang that I had helped to found.
I told a few select people within my family that, hey, I'm going to go meet a white supremacist or a former white supremacist. And a lot of them would say what any loving, normal family member would say, like, are you crazy?
In his email, he said that he was really kind of at a low point since the shooting. After all the dust had settled and this whirlwind had happened, it was starting to sink in that his father was gone.
And the first time that I met him, I had an injury to my eye. And this injury I suffered, a week before, and really my eye was super kind of lacerated.
Going into the dinner, my feelings of inadequacy and intimidation just continued to build. I felt like nothing I could say would be enough, or nothing I could say would be worthy, and he came walking in, and when I saw his eye, my first thought was, I love MMA and things like that, and my first thought is he looked like a fighter. So instead of saying, hey, I'm Arno, sorry about your dad, I was like, dude, what happened to your eye? Did you get in a brawl or something?
We started from the foundation of empathy, of concern.
The meeting proved to be fruitful. The pair realised they could work together to help find solutions to hate. They decided to form Serve to Unite, a group that works to divert people away from violent extremist ideologies.
Multi-symptom problems oftentimes have multi-symptom solutions. Is it about gun legislation? Oh, is it about mental health? Oh, is this about poverty? Is this about education? Is this about toxic masculinity? Is this about white privilege or white supremacy or a culture? And you come back and you're like, yep, all of that. It's about all of that.
Death to our enemies!
According to the Southern Poverty Law Centre's annual Year in Hate and Extremism report, the number of hate groups has increased by 55% since 2017. But against that backdrop, there are stories of hope, and it wouldn't be long before Arno was called upon to make a difference.
Chris Buckley's wife, Melissa, reached out to me when he was an Imperial Nighthawk for the Ku Klux Klan, and she needed my help in helping him take that next step.
It was a difficult process. You know, I had to keep it hidden from Chris. I was always raised in my family, you do not step out on your spouse.
You know, both of my parents were what I like to use the term like closet racists. Like out in public, they were pretty mild and polite, respectful, but once you got behind the door of your own home, I mean, there was a lot of racial slurs and stereotypes that were, you know, propagated.
Chris Buckley is a former Army sergeant that served 3 deployments to Afghanistan. He says he learned hate as a child.
Did you? Oh, man.
Right?
Like that?
Boom. Then you just fall down. Yep.
Chris signed up for the Army while at junior high school. Part of the motivation to do that came after the 9/11 Twin Towers attack.
I could still, like to this day, remember the way that feeling like just ran through me when they said that it was a terrorist attack. That was the first time I ever felt true hate. Like, I was angry. I couldn't get to a recruiter station fast enough.
Over the course of 3 tours to Afghanistan, Chris says he came to despise Muslims. After 13 years in the Army, Chris's life would take a dramatic turn.
The Humvee flipped once end over end, and then in the middle of its second flip, it started doing sideways, and it did 7 more flips down the highway. I crawled out of the vehicle, and I didn't realize my back was broke until I got about 100 feet from the Humvee. They put me on Oxycontin, which was like, I think it was 40 milligrams, and it got to the point where I just got so depressed that I would just lay back, and I had a little divot on my shirt made, and I would literally pour pills in there and just eat them until I'd fall asleep. And when I'd wake up, they'd still be there, so I could go right back to eating them. So I remember it eventually kind of turned into we were playing with heroin because it was a lot cheaper and it lasted a lot longer. I was seeing a lot of the news and a lot of the things where like they were, you know, removing Confederate statues and that people were like defacing them, destroying them, and that the president was on board with this. And there was a lot of propaganda that, you know, we were being infiltrated by Muslims, you know, the mosques popping up everywhere. And it was really scary for me on a like deeply traumatic level. And I remembered that the combination of seeing that and experiencing that trauma and the PTSD that I was dealing with mixed with the lowered, you know, decision-making abilities that I had by being impaired and under the influence of drugs, like, it just kind of manifested itself. I started Googling stuff and I come across the KKK. So when they reached out to me after I, you know, put my name and phone number on the website there and sent an email, they invited me to a cookout. There was beer. Everybody was, you know, real accepting, and, you know, I fit in. Whatever your poison is, it's there. If it's alcohol, drugs, women, like, they got whatever you want to keep you on board. And there was a lot of drugs there. Shortly after that, I started to begin my fight with sobriety. I started having those thoughts like I need to get out, and I realized that if I was gonna get sober and stay sober, I would have to get out and stay out.
And that's whenever I decided, you know, it was time to reach out to see if there was anybody that had ever been in the position that I was. And I started Googling, and I just typed in, you know, how to get a loved one out of a hate group, and Arna Michaelis' name come up.
And so I went down to Georgia, and I met with him, and our first meeting was very tense. He was incredibly hostile, he was incredibly aggressive, and he went stomping off, and it felt like I was talking to a wall. But a month later, he burned his Klan robe and left the Ku Klux Klan.
I knew what was going to happen. I was going to catch an ass whooping, a pretty significant ass whooping. It was about a week or two went by, and he called, and he said, "Hey, man, you want to go have a beer?" And I knew what time it was, man. It was time.
Well, 1 hour goes by, 2 hours go by, and I didn't see him, and I was like, you know, something's not right. And he finally comes back in, and he's got a black eye, his lips is busted, he's leaned over, and I'm like, "What happened?" He goes, "I'm out." And I was like, "But look at you know, you've got broken ribs, your face is all busted up, your head's all busted up." He goes, "But I'm out, it's okay."
Although Chris had left the Klan, he had yet to change his far-right racist beliefs.
I was fortunate to have enough resources to take him to Los Angeles, where we went to Homeboy Industries, an amazing gang prevention intervention agency that's helped tens of thousands of people, primarily Black and Latino people, make huge changes in their lives and return to being parents and citizens, and really like walk this path of compassion. And when I took Chris there, that's what I knew was the point of no return for him.
So when I say face the challenges of, like, you know, challenging your ideology, one of the things that me and Arno did was we went to Homeboy Industries, because I had this outlandish idea that white people were the only ones suffering in the country. You know, we were the ones that were unemployed and homeless and having our businesses shut down, losing our jobs. And I got to meet Father Greg and Hector Verrugo. And like, I was in awe when I walked in. Like, there was like no white people. It was all Hispanic street gangs that, you know, they get out of prison, they come in and they're like, "Hey, I just want to change my life." And like, no questions asked, no judgment, you know, they help them change their lives. And it kind of became my new addiction. You know, I just became addicted to that feeling of doing good. I felt like if I could take away more bad than I put in and leave the world better than I found it, then I'll have a life that was worth living.
8 years has passed since the attack at this temple in Wisconsin. The hurt, the loss remains as devastating today as it was then. Despite the hate, the attack did not achieve its aim in destroying this community.
Shifts are difficult. By no means can anybody change a habit and say, "Okay, this was just easy for me to do." Well, then you probably didn't change the habit that you were supposed to change. But the habit of white supremacy is not going to be easy for us to change. And it's going to take these tectonic plates to really shift and move. And with that comes difficulties and uncomfortabilities and vulnerabilities. We promise to our kids that we will let them inherit an earth that is better than the one that we inherited, one that requires work.
I firmly believe that each one of our individual lives and each one of our individual experiences affects the entire world. We don't know who the next suffering, isolated person on the verge of hurting themselves and someone else, we don't know who they are or where they are. So the more diligent we are to practice kindness at every turn in our interactions with other human beings, the greater the odds that we can divert that suffering, isolated person from the harm that they're headed for. And if someone were able to divert Wade Page on August 5th, 2012, and these 7 people whose photos we're looking at here were still alive, how different would the world be?
A world not built on division and fear, but on values of understanding, compassion, and forgiveness.